For those of you who don't know me, my name is Emma Brown and I'm the founder of Whimble. We are a care tech platform based in Ottawa, and our goal or our vision with Whimble is really to create an Uber style platform for personal care. So when people are in need of urgent or short-term personal care assistance, we help them connect with vetted, insured attendants on demand. So we're trying to basically fill gaps in the care ecosystem. And we also partner with event organizers and venues to ensure they offer on-site attendant services as part of their accessibility accommodations for guests, volunteers, employees who might need extra support to fully participate and enjoy the event. So some of you might have seen us at music festivals, conferences, sporting events. We're really out here trying to encourage every gathering where people gather to encourage the event organizers that if they're really committed and truly want to offer an inclusive experience for their guests and employees with disabilities or with care needs, they should have Whimble. So speaking of employees, I'm really excited today to welcome Sydney Elaine Butler to our webinar series. Sydney is the founder and HRDEIA consultant at Accessible Creates and a neurodiversity and disability employment coach. Through their company, Accessible Creates, Sydney offers training and consulting as well as coaching services to organizations focusing on enhancing accessibility and inclusivity from a human-centered perspective. This includes strategies for recruiting, retaining diverse talent, and it's informed by principles of intersectionality and human resources, alongside many other aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, Sydney, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
I think you also, in our webinar series, win the record of highest turnout. So that's a milestone for you as well, badge of honor.
Woo-hoo.
Yeah. So yeah, Sydney, I would love to hear a little bit more about your journey. What inspired you to start Accessible Creates?
Yeah, so looking back on, there was lot of things that inspired it. So growing up, I had to go to speech therapy, so I spoke too fast. I couldn't say my R's properly, and had some physical disabilities when it came to walking, and all these different things. But then in my classroom, there was boys, so I was also diagnosed autistic when I was 6 years old, but didn't know what that meant, and my parents didn't really know what it meant either. And just knowing that I had, alongside the other challenges I already mentioned, my boy classmates in particular, that were having meltdowns or having acting out in class, and my teachers didn't know how to handle it. And my parents always raised me to, if you see someone that needs help, you help them, kind of thing. And so I would help them, or I would be like, "Oh, teacher, we're going to the washroom. I'm going to take them for a walk," and ask them when I first get to know them about the cars or what they like. And then after I got to know them and talk to them a bit more, I'd be like, "Oh, this one likes Pokemon. This one likes cars. This one likes all these different things." And I innate empathy, but also seeing a disconnect when I would have, but be wanting to have a meltdown or having a moment where I needed more support, having to amass that and not, as I'm really going to physiotherapy. I'm really going to speech therapy. I can't have any more resources. I can't, and this, or something's just wrong with me because I'm really getting supports. I don't deserve more supports. And so that led to me masking throughout into high school. And in high school, I was battling really bad depression and not sure of what I wanted to do with my career. And I wanted to be an environmentalist, but I didn't have the math grades for that. And so I was struggling with that, didn't know how it was all connected. And so my aunt works in human resources, and my parents, like, again, the helping nature, like, oh, you'd be good at helping the employees. And I took a business elective and I did the business elective, and it was like, okay, maybe I can take a human resources course. So I took one at Sheridan College, and then they actually offered us a degree completion program. And then one day we were talking about accommodation in class, and I was just diagnosed also with fibromyalgia, was looking up a cane the night before, coming to terms with my autistic traits and what that looked like for me, my depression, and all these different things, and recognizing that the way my classmates were reacting when we were talking about accommodation, they were like, wait, people with disabilities actually want to enter the workplace, don't they get enough money from the government? They had such negative reactions to it. And I had such a negative reaction to the negative reaction, and I'm so frankly appalled and disgusted. Some already working in human resources that they were being paid by their employers to be in this program. Some are about to literally go into human resources and want to they say they care so much about people. And I'm just like, what is happening? And I then graduated from my degree in 2020 and was trying to get a traditional HR job, got a couple of them because I constantly put myself out there, was always transparent about I'm passionate about accessibility as well. And one employer actually took that and just it was okay, you can help us with the AODA policy and help rewrite it and modify it, make our programs and make HR more accessible, make our recruitment process more accessible. And while I was also in school, I was helping kids, teens, and adults with disabilities in recreational environment and seeing how my coworkers treated them and versus how they treated me as I had pain in my left leg and then my right leg and then in both legs and how they treated me as another coworker that also has a disability and used a power chair and how they treated her and how the supervisors were treating her. And so all these different things really led me to be like, and really finding my voice and knowing how I can contribute to both my disabled community and my HR community. And really those intersectional lenses led me to really decide to found my company, Accessible Creates.
That's amazing. You don't hear many founder stories that started at 6 years old. That's a really
I've always been a go-getter.
yeah. Do you find since I laugh not because it's funny, but because it's just, oh my God, I
Mm,
can't believe like those conversations, like what you heard in your HR class, are still happening. Like we hear it with
mm,
Whimble way more than I would like, of
mm,
people with disabilities don't have money to pay for private care or pay for additional supports. And it's just that we're just constantly battling against these
mm.
misconceptions. And I was wondering if you've seen a shift in the HR industry over the past couple of years of your career. Are you finding
Yeah,
those mentalities are less or unchanging or what?
I think they're changing, but they're not changing as fast as I would like. And so I think and I see the disconnect, right? People saying they care about their people and care about their employees. But when it comes to the nitty-gritty of actually supporting someone, accommodating someone, actually just making a more inclusive culture so that everyone feels included, there seems to be a disconnect. But I'm seeing shifts, but I'm seeing the small waves are still waves and they are happening, but I think having conversations like this and having other conversations and really working together and knowing how we all have a part to play in this work, disabled or not, frankly, and recognizing what part do we want to play in this work and how can we use our strengths and use our skills where we're at and to really make some change and also being open and willing to gather new strengths and new skills, but also addressing our weaknesses when it might come to implementing this effectively.
And leading to my next question, like implementing it in a way that's not just checking a box and say, yes, we are compliant with AODA or whatever you want to pick as your baseline, but how can organizations make these changes and implement changes and not stop at compliance and not stop at just checking a box? How do you see true inclusion being embraced in the workplace?
Yeah, so true inclusion means really moving beyond the legal requirements. And a lot of times organizations have these legal requirements based on the legislation of where the jurisdiction is. And a lot of the times it's just copy and pasting from the legislation and not really applying it to the organization. So even then, it's literally the bare bones and bare minimum. And so really being able to look at the legislation and being able to really modify it, working with your people to see what is currently happening in the organization. Or, for example, if it's not documented, because some managers might be doing it because they just are a more inclusive manager, they have a more empathetic heart to begin with. They might be doing all these different things, and then someone gets promoted or gets another position within the company or at another company, and it's this manager did, especially if it's the same organization, it's like, oh, this manager did this, but this manager doesn't have the training, or this manager doesn't know, or doesn't have the innate way of being a people leader, of leading people and having the empathetic heart when it comes to this. And so there's that disconnect. So really looking at what is being done well at the organization. Because a lot of times organizations, there's people doing great work in this but they're in silos. And so really breaking down those silos, really having that wealth and that transfer of knowledge is so imperative that's often ignored. And really also looking at building that culture where managers know how to actually be a manager, what it actually entails, and really supporting an employee. Because a lot of times managers just become managers because they were good at their previous position, and not everyone wants to be a manager. So it's like, hey, do you want to become a manager? Do you want to be developed further to have those managerial duties, or do you not? What is other promotions and ways of promoting people? Are you having a culture? What are people saying about your culture? Having exit interviews, or even in the interview process, every stage of the employment, people are telling you information. Sometimes organizations are just not listening, or they're like, or they just want to hear for the big reactions. But the real issues and growth happens in those little days and those little moments.
Yeah. And when you go into an organization, you start working with them. What's like the lowest hanging fruit that organization, obviously it depends on like the
Mhm.
organizational structure and whether there's people who like get it in leadership roles or not, but do you find there's a typical low hanging fruit of what organizations can do to start this journey beyond compliance?
Yeah, I think really looking at where the employees are and where the employees want to go as an organization, or seeing even the managers and really evaluating what are the main issues you keep seeing over and over again. And usually when they bring me in, that's sadly it's not proactive. A lot of the time it's reactive, right? That's just the nature of the game. And so you brought me in for a reason. What are those stories? What are those situations that led to this moment, right? And I think a lot of times they try to diminish that's, oh, that was just a small thing, but it's like that's still part of the problem. And so really looking at what are you seeing? What are people vocalizing? What are people, and sometimes in the flip side, it's what are people not saying? And then, but you seeing that shift, or you seeing that dynamic in individuals when someone walks into a room or something happens. And again, disabled or not. So it's like people having a perception when a manager comes in the room that, it's going to be negative, it's going to be, oh, this manager again kind of thing. Or it's what are the culture you're really creating in an organization, and where is it at, and really evaluating, is it meeting the needs of our people? Are we being most productive? What does our employee morale look like? And I think a lot of times that's sorely overlooked because people are like, oh, they go in, they do their job, get a paycheck, go home, right? But we spend so much of our time at work, and it it's not all we are, but it's a big chunk of who we are and how we see ourselves and our worth in society, unfortunately. And so really looking at it's like, how are we creating systems in place that allow people to not just survive at work, but really thrive and feel like they have a voice and can speak up? Because actually, what's the worst thing is that a culture that, oh, no one says anything. That's actually not a good thing, right? That's a scary place to be. It's no, it just again just is just there for the paycheck, and if they're not willing to have these conversations, and it could be a root of an underlying problem.
Mhm. We hear that all the time from event organizers when we talk about our on-site attendance service, and they say, "Oh, we don't need that. None of our guests have ever asked for it." And I'm like, well, either they're not asking for it and they're not
Mm,
having a great time, or they're just not coming, and you're missing out
mm,
on ticket sales that you could easily get with the addition of one
mm,
service. So it's always
mm,
so frustrating when you hear that. We don't have that problem. Nobody needs that. You can tell you're really starting from a very beginning point on that
It's like, so we're starting from scratch.
Yes. I'm going to assume, and maybe in the future I
Mhm,
should do like a pre-webinar survey of our signups just to see where people are at.
mm,
But I'm going to assume if people have signed up for this webinar, they are trying to be a little bit more proactive. Hopefully, no one's had an HR crisis and then and then their solution was just to
Email me right now.
but assuming people are trying to be proactive and trying to build these
Mm.
systems in place, like what's a good starting point? Is it a anonymous employee survey? Is it one-on-one conversations? Where should managers start if they're trying to actually acknowledge that there might be some gaps and figure out where those gaps are?
I think having a mix of what you just said, having an anonymous survey and having those conversations. I think some people want to have their identity and voice known when they make these concerns, and they want, or a lot of times people, they might acknowledge their privilege in the positions that they're in and want to speak up. And on the flip side, some entry-level positions or people that are even in the flip side that might be in higher positions and don't want to be ridiculed or punished in those positions, or they that anonymous survey is so important because it allows you to get that rich data and really understand what is happening at the organization. And having that feedback is so critical to really move forward with as an organization and to really understand that it's you're getting that data to help you be proactive by even asking those questions and having those surveys, and having a huge way to be proactive is having those anonymous surveys, because a lot of people, and I always suggest that, I've been suggesting that for the past 4 years. And I remember when I first started suggesting that to organizations, it was this like foreign concept. They were like, why would we anonymize? Like, you want to, and it's why do you need to know what the employee is? Like, I'm like, there's that fear that of being reprimanded, all these different things. And now in 2025, 4 years later, companies are like, oh yeah, anonymous surveys, that's the way to go. And I'm
Mhm.
so glad to see that. But when I first started, it was like, what do you mean? And so really having that culture where, and that culture that focuses on that knowledge, right? And how do you mobilize that knowledge and how
Mhm.
you're actually moving forward and being transparent and open to your employees about this is what we're thinking about doing, but we want your feedback, and being transparent of how that information is going to help them in the long run. I think a lot of times companies, so we have to do the survey, it's anonymous, or we want to have a conversation with you, but don't really say why. So I
Mhm.
think really saying that why piece is necessary and overlooked.
And then opening the door to the conversation with the people who do want to advocate for themselves and
Yes.
share that information. Yeah, I can just see I started in a very different career path and I've been in some really interesting organizations. And I can totally see
Mhm.
how, in some situations, especially with certain management styles, like that information weaponized is like a pretty extreme term, but I can see how that information can get weaponized. So if you tie an accommodation to a specific employee and then that employee, it's
Mhm.
natural, every employee has certain value to their
Mhm.
manager. So I can see how like it would deprioritize that solution if the manager associated with certain.
And again, it takes away that it is individual because we all have our individual opinions, but really it's like getting to the collective
Yeah,
of the workplace and
yeah.
really instead of focusing on reprimanding or singling out that one employee or a bunch of employees.
So theoretically, a company has started collecting data and they've started to identify some gaps. Like, what are some of the common, or what are just some examples of barriers that you've seen, whether identified by an employee, identified by you, by a
Mhm.
manager? What are some of those barriers, whether visible or invisible, that you see come up frequently across organizations?
A huge one. So I've been coaching neurodivergent and disabled employees for the past year and a half, and they always are worried, like, how do I really communicate with my manager? I feel the manager's trying to communicate to me one way and I'm trying to communicate to them another way, and we just keep hitting a wall. And I'm always I'm like, we all have different processing of ways we gather data and process that data. And so they like, oh, I want to ask my manager to maybe send me an email with instructions instead of just when I'm on a meeting with them, they just say, and then I forget it, and then I go do my work. And I'm like, what was the first task again? And so if they send it to an email or an instant message, depending on the tools in the organization, if it was written, I could refer back to it without bothering them again. And a lot of employees, the fear of bothering their manager and asking them a question to help you be successful at work, but that's still the misconception. So instead of having it written, and explaining why. I think a lot of times on both sides, the why is missing. So the managers don't explain why way are they communicating. And on the employee, they a lot of times they don't advocate for the why. They just like, oh, and so really breaking down those gaps to be like, to be able to, in order to do my job better and to be more efficient in my job. And I'm so passionate about my job, or I like my job, and I'm wanting to do the best work I possibly can. I need to have those instructions written. And so I
Mhm.
actually had a boss when I was working on a startup when I first graduated, and he would send me a million voice notes. And I was just like, I could go back and listen to the voice notes, but my brain was still going to process what he was saying. fully. Like I was like, okay, I had to listen to it 10 times. I was like, that's taking a lot of time out of my day to listen to it over and over again to the nuances. And so I actually came across a transcription service called Otter, which is actually not the best for most organizations. There's other ones that carry out so fast. But really looking at, okay, he's, oh, you can put it through a transcription service. And so I did that, and it really helped me. I was like, okay, I could see it had action items, so I could have the clear action items of what he would just say all these different ideas because it was a startup, so he had all these different ideas of how to implement his bigger strategy. And so I was like, oh, okay, this is what he wants. And then I could have a more fleshed out idea of what he needed from me. And
Mhm.
so by having, but didn't he could have just written to me instead, or could have done both in tandem in seeing how what works best for both of us and coming to a mutual understanding. Because I even took time for me to go through the transcription. There isn't an accommodation you can ask for, but for me to do it on my own and to took some time, right? And so really looking at how are you communicating with your employees? Are all
Mhm.
your employees clear if you having a meeting like this, having transcriptions enabled, having different things in place to really look at how are we best communicating and how are we communicating in various ways to support the greater needs of our employees.
It's really interesting. I'm guilty if I'm walking my dog late at night or if I'm driving and a thought like pops into my head. I'm definitely guilty of firing off a quick voice note on Slack. And I was like, oh,
But
Slack,
I think Slack does the transcription
they
now.
do transcribe it. I've noticed it's not like the highest quality. So now I'm
Yes.
like, is there a better way we can offer both the
And
audio and the written
But I
comments?
think even just, how we, like you said, walking the dog all late at night, and because you're a founder, right? And so you have all these ideas. And so, having them as a voice note and then maybe being like, I'm leaving this here, but you don't have to do
Yeah,
anything with it. And then revisiting it and see what are
yeah.
the key points that I was
Mhm,
trying to say in that message,
mhm,
right? And this is the high level, this is like what I was saying. And just I think even just recognizing that, oh, that you recognize that you were guilty of that, and that's okay. Like you're a human being, you're in the process. That's what works best for you, but not
mhm.
going to work for the
Yeah,
masses, right? And so just being able to learn how to be more adaptable is key.
yeah. And those conversations between the manager and the employee, I feel like I'm using you as a coaching service for this 40 minutes. But those conversations between the manager and the employee, is that something that can happen organically during the weekly standing meeting? Or should the manager be proactive about, I'm going to carve out time to specifically chat about like communication strategy, or like how should if the manager is trying to be proactive and maybe recognizing that there are some things being lost in translation between
Mhm.
the two sides, like how should they position that to the employee to bring them into the conversation and not make them feel like it's a problem, like it's
Yeah, so I
just,
think by having those weekly check-ins and really looking at and asking the employee how they feel, this is how, and really being like, I've seen some things. What do you think? How do you feel about the communication? How do you feel about how I give you information, assign you tasks, and really leaving it up to them to guide the conversation, but also having tools in your toolkit to be able to keep it under control and to really keep the conversation structured. And I think a lot of times what I've also seen, I remember I was coaching, it's funny, I was coaching an employee and then I was coaching a manager, and I was like, pretty sure this employee, like, I can't say it, but I'm just like, my brain's like connecting the dots. And I was just like, oh, they're talking about each other. And it was interesting because the employee, yeah, I have weekly check-ins with the manager, and the managers, yeah, we have these weekly check-ins. And I think they're going pretty well. And then the employees, I'm so confused after the meeting. And I was just like, okay. And then there was no agenda, right? It's like they just had a general agenda, weekly check-in. But I'm
mhm,
like, and then like the manager feels like they're too busy to create an agenda or don't know what to really focus on. And the employees, I want to talk about these things. So I'm like, you can create an agenda and share that with your manager if what you want to cover, or even talking about the communication styles in the part of agenda items, or check in how you feel about the communication. Is it improved? Is it
mhm,
where are we at? Are we making progress? Are we not making progress? And so really looking at what are things that you can actually provide your employee to really make those changes.
and then that's like you've got an employee, you want to keep them, like they're in, and you're identifying the gaps and working for it. But if we go like all the way back to the beginning of the employee journey, when we actually talk about like recruiting, how can employers and organizations actually bring in a diversity of thought and a diversity of communication styles and make sure that they're setting those employees up, like they're finding them, they're recruiting them, they're getting them through the recruitment processes and all the different screening tools, and then they're helping them like onboard and thrive. Big question.
Yeah, I think a lot that is a big question. But I think really challenging your own editorial bias and barriers that it comes to people with disabilities or just someone that you're interacting with. It's like you're not going to get along with everyone 100% of the time, and so just but are they capable to do the job? Do they have the skills that the job needs? And I think a lot of times in job descriptions or job postings or even in interviews, managers or human resources, the recruiting for this position have a certain perception of what they want the person to look like, sound like, to do that position. But it's really challenging in those all. Why do I think that? It was like replacing a person in a position is what they don't look like other person that was in that position, but you're still imagining someone like that in the position, right? So it's okay, that person left, for who knows what reason, right? Let's work on having someone new and someone else that can add value to the team and to the organization. And really, it's what are the skills they're really bringing to the team and really looking at what are their experiences they're bringing to the team, what and recognizing that this and really doing a strength-based approach instead of, I think sometimes, and what I've seen in recruitment is operating from a weakness standpoint. And they don't, it's all internal bias and all it so happens so quickly in the brain, in the human brain, but really challenging that. What are the bare bones of the position that someone needs to be able to do, right? What are the fundamentals that we would like someone to have, skills that we would like the person to have in that position? And really, I think also on the flip side, a lot of times we talk about like how we're talking about, you said the recruitment, but I think also on the employee or the candidate rather, is to really be like, is this a good fit for me? And to think really looking at again, or even the recruiters, like, why do you think that someone's not a good culture fit or not a good fit for your organization? That speaks again to the culture that you're creating at the organization and those artifacts you're creating. And so really looking at, okay, what are the systems we have in place? Or what barriers do we have in the recruitment process for people with disabilities or that it's neurodivergent? Are we making sure we have closed captions enabled? Are we sharing all these different things? What are the apparatuses we're using to actually remove those barriers?
You mentioned closed captioning. Is there any other common barriers organizations like making the same mistake over and over again in that recruitment process?
Yeah, so you're supposed to have an accommodation statement, and I think a lot it's usually at the bottom. It actually should be closer to the top because it's seen in an afterthought when it's at the bottom, and not having someone that was just the HR team, which is great, right? And it's a step in the right direction. But so maybe having someone that accessibility at the organization, right? And so really showing that you care and really making those changes to care more about this, right? And so get all accessibility related requests, whether it's for an interview or for any aspect of the company, go directly there. And then all the accessibility can flag it to the HR email if needed, but it still goes through those channels. And so really recognizing that it's a process and really looking at what are the things that, and even asking people what's actually in the organization. How did you feel about the recruitment process? What did, and really getting that feedback, or even evaluating how, when it comes to when people are asking accommodations, do you get, I remember I was talking to my friend and she asked for questions ahead of time. And that's a quick, easy thing you could do because we all have busy lives. We know we're more than just work. So sending the questions ahead of time to all candidates. And so she asked an employer, a potential employer, for questions ahead of time as an accommodation. And they denied her because they said that's going to not provide equity for other candidates. But if they did it for all candidates, that would have created more equitable. It means making sure it's accessible for people with disabilities and anyone that might need it. And so just looking at Just because something is working doesn't mean it's working to the best of its ability.
Oh, I love those are like two, not that they have to be easy wins, but sometimes when you're an overwhelmed manager, you need a few easy wins to get some momentum going. And I love the idea of moving the statement up towards the top of the job description. And we see, especially in the tech industry, like we see a lot of
Hmm.
job descriptions that are like bragging about the culture and how cool it is to
Hmm.
work there and amazing, but like just incorporating a bit around like accessibility into that cool tech bro vibe. Like
Hmm.
that's not a hard thing to do. And then yeah, I love the questions in advance and hopefully not at 11 p.m. the night before like I did to you for this webinar. Hopefully a little bit earlier.
I usually say when you send that interview request, attach those questions,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's such a
And
simple thing to do.
I started to, so when I worked as an HR clerk at a nonprofit, and I was like, we should attach the questions ahead of time. They're like, because we were about to, so I was a summer student, and we were about to hire a bunch of some other summer students to replace the current summer students. And it's basically hiring a replacement, but that's another story. What I wish we had when I was doing the interview process that I just went through with you all, I wish we had the questions ahead of time. And I'm like, that could help anyone, like people, maybe parents, or we have other schoolwork or other things they're doing because life is busy. And they're like, oh, that's a great idea. But also, I also in that interview request email, also including if you need any accommodation, reminding them that they can ask for accommodation in that actual interview request because it's at all stages of the hiring process, not just when you submit your resume or cover letter. It's at all stages. And so really, what does that look like in practice?
I love that. We are just about to start our recruiting cycle for our winter 2026 co-op students, and I'm doing this. It's going to happen.
We're checking
um,
in.
yeah. Okay, my next question was around like your human-centered approach, but I feel like everything you do has a human-centered approach. But when you're talking to organizations who may not have that same like philosophy or ethos, how do you communicate to them what taking a human-centered approach means in practice?
Yeah, so yeah, a lot of times companies want to do what's best for the everyone, right? And I'm like, you can inclusive design, inclusive culture, but also recognizing that there's going to be individual needs that come out of that as well. And so it's like I'm really putting people at the center of the work that you're doing, looking at policies and procedures. It's there in place for the employees to know the expectations, but also have the expectations. What are the expectations of the employee for the employees to the employer in the organization? What are the duties you have to be inclusive to an employee? How are you speaking to your employees? And just really looking at how are you treating your human capital, but not just looking at them as human capital, frankly, really looking at them as human beings that are coming into your office that have families, that have lives outside of work. And how are you creating environments that they don't have to heal from? And so really taking account trauma-informed lens, having a more accessible lens, and really looking at also when it comes to accommodation. I was working with a company and they had a great list of accommodation offerings, but they were so hyper focused on only offering those that they forgot to really look at the whole person or recognize the nuances of somebody in accommodation when it comes to mental health. Someone, for example, someone's in a depressive episode and someone that just has depression. Like I battle depression. I've been battling depression since I was 11 years old. Right now, I'm not currently in a depression, but 3 months ago, I
Mhm.
was, right? And so it's episodic. And so how are you really meeting the needs of accommodating employees or meeting employees where they're at in those times? How are you creating systems that are people at the focus, but then also being able to personalize and to individualize because not one size fits all in those moments? And how are you equipping your managers or your human resources or even the coworkers, frankly, on what it means to be a decent human being in the workplace and actually supporting each other in the workplace?
If you had to give like leaders, managers, organizations like one thing they could do to be more empathetic, human-centered leaders tomorrow, what would you tell them to
Yeah.
do?
I think, like we said at the beginning, like asking for that feedback in both informal or so like surveys, anonymous surveys, or informal, which is having a conversation and really listening to your employees. Like employees want to tell you what they think or what they feel in the organization, but sometimes, oh, that so and so doesn't really listen to me, or my manager doesn't listen to me, or they don't take my suggestions or my concerns seriously. And what happens with that a lot of times is because the company is being defensive, or the manager is being defensive, or the manager, for example, can think it's a personal attack, right?
Mhm.
It's like I did everything I could, and now they're attacking me, and they feel like I'm not doing enough. But it could be something you're doing as yes, but it's a comment and a suggestion to a bigger problem, right? And really recognizing that listening goes both ways. And so really listening to the employee and then actually starting to implement what they're saying or to try things out, having conversations with them. Could this work? Could this work? And having other suggestions and things ready, but listening to them in the entirety of what they're saying and then really taking that and taking those strides and taking those and not taking them as a personal attack, but rather, okay, we're in this together. What does this actually look like? What are the little things we can start changing every day? And how can I, even asking, how can I better support you or support your needs in this
Mhm.
moment? And I think so there's accommodation, there's reasonable adjustments, but there's also just supporting an individual. Life is hard. And so just being there for and being able to support and to really come from a place of wanting to support and recognizing your own capacity as well when it comes to supporting. Do you have capacity to support on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, and what does that employee need from you? And reaching that compromise and reaching those decisions. It's a team effort and really working together as a team to make the change and to make the workplace more accessible and inclusive for all.
Mhm. Yeah, and I can see even myself as a manager where you're like, oh, I had the conversation, check the box, I did what I said I'd do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that's the easier
Mm-hmm.
part. It's the you have to take what you're told very seriously and actually take the initiative to implement
And,
after that.
it's like being patient with yourself as the manager and being transparent. It's like, I want to implement what you said, or I'm working on it. Because a lot of times, I think managers that kind of saying have the conversation, but then the kind of things get busy too, like side of your desk, or allowing the employee to check in or making what works best for your brain, writing it down or wherever you need to
Mhm.
put it, but to really continue that momentum and being transparent that, hey, I'm a little busy. It's not the top of my to-do list right now, but I'll get to it.
Mhm.
And that transparency is so simple, but again, very overlooked and not or seen as a lot of times as a sign of weakness when they're being that transparent, or it's
Yeah,
like the employee's gonna think less of you
yeah.
when you say you're busy or you have other priorities right now. But that's just the reality. But being communicative to the employee and being transparent is so key.
Everybody's human.
Hmm.
Awesome. I have a couple more questions for you, but I do want to just give a shout out to the audience. If you have any questions for Sydney, please submit them in the chat, or I believe the Q&A function is open. Happy to answer any that come through. I'm really curious to dive a little bit deeper into your work specifically around neurodiversity. And I'm curious if I'm sure especially recognizing the times we are in and the week we are in, there are many misconceptions about neurodiversity in this scary world. But in terms of workplaces, what's
Yes.
a misconception about neurodiversity that you wish more workplaces challenged?
I think a lot of what I'm seeing is a lot of people think that people that are neurodivergent only have very specific skills or can only be in entry-level positions, and that's not true. It can be at any level of the organization. And I think a lot of times what we're seeing, and so there's so many articles of, oh, how neurodiversity is a competitive advantage, or all these different things and these buzzwords and these, but I think a lot of times that people forget that everyone has different ways of thinking, right? And so people that are neurodivergent have a different way of thinking that they bring to the team. And we all have different experiences and skills that that shape us and who we are. And so we try to put people in boxes and categories, but really looking at a whole person and what they have to offer and what they're wanting to offer an organization, and to really look at what are the strengths of a person and really playing to those strengths and really, and when those weaknesses do come up, it's again not a human flaw, not a characteristic flaw. Just do they probably train? Do they have adequate training? Do they have the resources to be successful in what they need to do in that organization and in their job tasks? And really challenging those biases of why do we have this misconception of what it looks like and what it could be in the workplace.
Yeah. And then we just got one last
Mhm.
question about your services. Do you offer DEIB or accessibility inclusivity audits to your clients?
Yes, I do, and I offer them in various different ways. My main focus this year, my main passion is policy audits when it comes to inclusivity and accessibility. But I do also, I have audited for physical spaces and environments and seeing what the organizational culture looks like at an organization and being that fly on that wall.
Awesome. Is DEIB an acronym? Oh,
Yes, it is.
belonging.
Yes.
Ooh, I love that. That's the first time
So
I've heard.
in 2022, I was, yeah, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I was a diversity,
Amazing.
inclusion, belonging facilitator.
Amazing. I love that. Sydney, thank you so much for sharing so openly and honestly. Thanks everyone for being part of this conversation. And if you have any questions about Whimble or about Accessible Creates, you're welcome to reach out to either of us.